Welcome to Author Stories, the podcast where we talk to the best writers in the industry and discuss writing and the creative process. Whether you're a writer, a reader, or both, we hope you'll find something here that makes you love books and the writers that create them. You can find archives of all of the great conversations I've had with authors over the years at hankgarner.com. Take some time and browse around there. I'm sure you'll find a new author to love, find inspiration for your own creative life, and find a new story to get lost in. Let's thank some sponsors who make the show possible. Vedic by K.J. Heritage. The dead don't always die. Top company scientist Chin Jelinek has committed suicide. Vedic, a half-alive empath with no memory of who or what he is, will die in 6 hours if he can't find out why, or so the company tells him, an added incentive to get the job done. Our hero soon discovers he is one of the skilled, a genetically enhanced human revered and despised in equal measure, a bloodhound with a terrifying past who'll stop at nothing in his pursuit of the truth. And the skilled always get their guy, don't they? Vedic, number 1, by K.J. Heritage, on sale now. There's a link to it in the show notes. K.J. Heritage's uncanny sense of pacing and story puts him at the forefront of today's speculative fiction writers. Gritty, intense, and compelling, Vedic is something you don't run into often enough in sci-fi, a cerebral thrill ride you don't want to end. Prepare to lose sleep reading Vedic, delicious science fiction. That's what other people are saying about it. Find out for yourself. Vedic, the first book in the series by K.J. Heritage. Jasper T. Scott. His box set Dark Space, the complete series. This is 6 books bundled together, on sale now for 99 cents. 6 complete books, over 600,000 copies sold. More than 2,000 pages of epic space opera for the low price of 99 cents. Also available in Kindle Unlimited if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber. Humanity is defeated. 10 years ago, the Scythians invaded the galaxy with one goal: to wipe out the human race. Now the survivors are hiding in the last human sector of the galaxy, Dark Space, once a place of exile for criminals, now the last refuge of mankind. The once galaxy-spanning Imperium of star systems is left guarding the gate, which is the only way in or out of Dark Space, but not everyone is satisfied with their governance. Freelancer and ex-convict Ethan Ortain is on the run. He owes crime lord Alec Barandi 10,000 souls, and his ship is badly damaged. When Barandi catches up with him, he makes an offer Ethan can't refuse. Ethan must infiltrate and sabotage the Valiant, the Imperial Star System's fleet carrier which stands guarding the entrance of Dark Space, and then his debt will be cleared. While Ethan is still undecided about what he'll do, he realizes that the Imperium has been lying and putting all of Dark Space at risk. Now Brandi's plan is starting to look like a necessary evil, but before Ethan can act on it, he discovers that the real plan was much more sinister than what he was told, and he will be lucky to escape the Valiant alive. Grab all 6 books for 99 cents right now. Dark Space, the complete series by Jasper T. Scott. The Unwelcome Trilogy by R.D. Brady. Survivor, Mother, Leader, and Humanity's Last Chance. Deep within the remnants of the United States, Lila Richards oversees a camp of 200 survivors. In a world where living is an everyday struggle, and only through banding together can people survive, the arrival of the unwelcome only made her job harder. Riley Quinn and Miles Jones have been raised by Lila for the last 5 years. They're also one of the cursed, the children between the ages of 13 and 18, whom the unwelcome kill on sight. No questions, no pleas, just death. Protecting one another and the people of their camp is ingrained in all of them, but now each of them faces increased danger as the reason why the cursed have been targeted by the unwelcome slowly comes to light, and that truth will shock them to their core. Now time is running out, not just for the cursed who are being hunted down by the unwelcome, not just for Lila and her family who will face the greatest challenge yet, but for all of humanity. The world changed radically 35 years ago, but today humanity's very existence is on the line, and the fight has begun that will ensure its future or its annihilation. Fans of A.G. Riddle, James Rollins, Suzanne Collins, and Brandon Sanderson will love the Unwelcome Trilogy. Pick up your copy of the Unwelcome Trilogy on Amazon today. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Karen White back on the show. She was with us about this time last year, talking about her brand new book at the time, Dreams of Falling. What an amazing book. I think we even did some giveaways and made some people very happy. Karen has a brand new book out now. When you're hearing this, it's called The Christmas Spirits of Trad Street. And it's a bit of a departure from the last book, but it is absolutely Karen White. Thank you for joining me again, Karen.
Thank you, Hank. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Last time when we talked, we had... You know, when I ask people about their first memories of wanting to be a writer or storyteller, and you gave a very candid answer that I think a lot of people would love to say and they're too scared to. And you talked about that you don't always love writing. And I think a lot of people feel that way, but they're scared to say it. As someone who's had as much success as you've had and put out so many great books, is that something that you still struggle with, and how do you overcome the those days where you just don't feel like going through it?
Right. Well, pretty much every day is that day that I don't feel like sitting down at my computer. It's just hard work. It's mentally exhausting. But the end of the story basically is. I can't remember which famous writer. I always get it wrong, so I'm not going to guess. A famous writer, a female. She was quoted as saying, "I hate writing. I love having written," which is, yes, that's exactly how I feel. The writing process is excruciating. I'm working on a book right now. It's my 2021 book, and I think it's going to kill me. But I keep doing it, and I'm doing revisions right now and some copy edits, and, I'm like, okay, this is pretty good. This doesn't, stink like I thought it did. And so that's always encouraging. But when you're in the trenches and you're working on that first draft, it is torture. I mean, I'm sorry, that's, all you wannabe writers out there, you need to know the truth. It's really, really hard. The fun part is going on tour and talking about the book, and finishing the book and typing the end and having it be accepted by your editor. That's all wonderful, but being in the trenches where you're not washing your hair every day and you're staring at the computer screen, it's agonizing.
Man, it is, and like I said, I think a lot of people deal with that. Sometimes you sit down at the keyboard and it's just magic, and sometimes it's just not. But I guess that's the difference in being a professional is getting through the story,
this is not
even
a hobby.
When you don't feel like
it. Mm-hmm.
I would imagine there are a lot of plumbers that don't feel like doing what they do every day.
Absolutely. Everybody. Sometimes their days are magic and fun, and some days it's like you'd rather, why did I pick this career choice? But again, it's like, I used to work in the business world. There are many days I didn't want to go to work, but, I would be fired. So, again, I look at, writing is a very creative thing. Of course it is. But it's also work. It's also a job. It's also a career. And you need to always, if you want to be a serious writer, you need to remember that. You can't just, if I only wrote when I felt like it, I would have maybe written one book in the last 25 years.
Right. That's so true. It's so true. You also talked about your early love of Nancy Drew. Does revisiting, maybe not rereading the books, but kind of reconnecting with the early love of reading, does that help a writer to push through some of those hard times?
Of course it does. And I won't make the mistake my daughter made. And when she was like her freshman year in college, she was home for the summer, and she reread every single Nancy Drew book because I passed on my love for Nancy Drew to her as a little girl. And after she read them, she's like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that because there's so many inconsistencies in the Nancy Drew, series. Like every mystery happens, in one summer. Apparently, she had a very busy summer because apparently every Nancy Drew mystery happened that summer. So instead, I have some go-to books that all I need to do is open it up in the middle and start reading and remember, oh my gosh, yes, I remember how wonderful this book made me feel when I was reading it. And that really does feed the well. Or like right now I've been given a book to blurb. It has not been published yet. It won't come out until next year. But it is, I cannot wait to get into that book. And if I'm just, I'm working on revisions, which is very tedious. And, when I feel like getting those knitting needles out and jabbing them in my eyeballs so I don't have to do it anymore, I go find, I just start reading this book, or I'll go find, one of the beautiful books that I have read. For instance, one of the things on top of my pile here is All the Light We Cannot See. I finished the book, but every once in a while I'll go back and I'll just, reread some of my favorite parts, and it just sort of feeds that creative well, which is, what we need sometimes. Because life in general is not good for feeding the creative well. At least my life isn't, So I need to go find it where I can.
Well, life is full of distractions, and there are lots of things that can be done other than, making up people out of thin air. And stuff like that. Another thing we talked about was the idea of book hangovers, and you told me this great story of how you discovered Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series, and after reading that, you had this serious hangover where nothing else would kind of satisfy or even capture your imagination. Writers get that as well, not just readers, where we get so invested in a setting or a set of characters or something like that it's hard to move on. Do you ever experience that and not wanting to let characters or a place go?
I feel terrible to say this because when I finish a book, and I've turned it in, and the revisions are done, the edits are done, it is done, it's going to be printed now, and I won't see it again until it's published. I'm like, don't let the door hit you in the backside on your way out. I'm ready to say goodbye to those characters. And what brings it back to me, my love of these characters and setting and everything else, it's when, because then time passes. So, it's like giving birth. It's like you still love your child, but dear God, you don't want to really go through that again. So I go on book tour, and then I have to start talking about these characters, and I start talking to readers who've read the book, who love these characters, and you're like, oh yeah, that's right, I created these wonderful people, and then you fall in love with it all over again.
So the new book, we revisit Trad Street. Again, is this one of these cases where you're we've been to Trad Street before, and I think a lot of people go through that where by the time you finish with editing and talking about the book endlessly with people, that you're just ready to be done with those characters. But there's something, when there's that bit of magic that it comes back after a little bit of time. And you've got a little space, kind of like some relatives that come visit. Sometimes.
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
or your children, when you send them away to college, and you're like, thank God, and then they come back, you're like, I missed you.
I missed you. Now give me a chance to miss you again, right?
Yes, exactly.
What is it about Trad Street that keeps bringing you back?
Well, it's funny. So the first book, The House on Trad Street, came out in 2008. So the Christmas Spirit on Trad Street is book number 6 in the series. So it's been 11 years, and there have been 6 books. There will be one more book, one final book. So when I wrote the first book, it was only supposed to be 2. And, and I love these characters. I love Charleston. I really loved writing that book because it's sort of a palate cleanser. I do these big Southern women's fiction books like Dreams of Falling. And then Trad Street books, they're sort of my palate cleanser, in between these big emotional books. There's still emotion and stuff going on in the Trad Street books, but there's also humor. And then you have the ghost. It's like something so different from what I'm writing that I do get excited about starting a new one. Because with the series, I've been with these characters for 11 years now. It really is like, going on summer vacation and visiting your favorite cousins. Because there's something so familiar. And starting the next book in a series, you're not starting with a blank slate. You already have your characters in place, or most of them. I always introduce new ones in each book. But you have your setting in place. You have your main character in place. You have so much backstory already in place. So it's still, you know, every time you open up your computer and it's a blank page, it's still like, you know, opening a vein, but it's also, you know, sort of refreshing knowing that I don't have to start from scratch.
Right. Exactly. That brings up a great question that you talked about writing these big sweeping Southern women's epic stories and then coming back to something that's a little lighter, more familiar, a little levity in those stories. Do you feel like that these are different genres, because one thing we hear is, when you find an audience, don't dare change what you do because your audience won't go with you. How do you as a writer and as a publisher feel about switching gears? And do you ever worry that someone, who loved Dreams of Falling won't quite get this story or, think that this is the same Karen White?
Right. Well, that's very interesting. When I first came up with the idea of the House on Trad Street, I was very happily publishing one book a year, my big Southern women's fiction books. And my agent loved it, and she said, well, this is kind of different from what you're doing. Let me send it to your editor, my editor at Penguin, who has been my editor since forever. My editor bought it, and it's like, yeah, this is different. We might want to change your name, because that's what some authors do when they want to write a little something different. Like Nora Roberts did it with her J.D. Robb books because they're so different. Because you don't want to scare away your readers. So I wrote the book, and then sent it to my editor, and she said, we're keeping the Karen White name. This is still a Karen White book, meaning it is set in a southern place. It's a very southern story, and it's a woman's journey story. Like all of my books are character driven, and these books are no different. Sure, we throw some, ghosts in and, Charleston and da-da-da-da-da, but it is still about Melanie and her insecurities and her journey, like all of my other books. And so the good news is that it has been a lovely crossover audience. People who discover my Trad Street series then read the other books and vice versa. So it's actually been a very positive thing.
Well, like I said in the beginning, the new book is a departure if you liked last summer's book, but it's still very Karen White. Like I see your your fingerprints are all over it. There's no distinction.
Right, and my editor agreed, and I'm so glad they didn't have me change my name, because I think it's been a really positive thing.
Absolutely. You talk about Southern women's fiction a lot. Other than the place that the setting, the place of the setting in the books, is there anything intrinsically that makes a book a Southern women's book?
And it's funny, and I really just use that title because that's what most publishing houses would, shelve it as. I have always just written books that I want to read. They tell the story about a character I want to read about things that happen, The thing that makes it Southern, that's what I'm familiar with. I come from a very Southern background. I live in Georgia, so it's what I know. And what I know is, the way the climate here, the way people talk, the way people move, the way neighbors act towards each other, which is, I'm sure, around the country there's similarities, but there is something so different to the South, and it's what I'm familiar with, and that's why, what I write, they call it Southern fiction, but it's really just me writing what I know. Women's fiction, the books always center around a woman, although I, always have male readers. But, it's a marketing thing. You have to sort of label books so that they fit somewhere. And so a reader, will have a general idea of what kind of book it is. But I really hate labels. Sadly, it's something that we have to live with.
Right. The new book, The Christmas Spirits on Trad Street, is definitely a Christmas-themed book. And looking back through your catalog, I think this is the first one that you've done kind of a specific holiday theme.
Right.
Are there any specific challenges that come up when you write a book that's going to, center on this time of year, and we'll probably get, it's heavy marketing this time of year.
Right.
Is there anything different about writing a book centered there?
Well, yeah, it was a lot more fun because, when I write the other books, it's like, okay, what haven't we done in the previous books so this is new and special or whatever? Well, with Christmas, my gosh, Charleston at Christmas is gorgeous, and they do all sorts of things all over the city. And, there's a house on I think it's Broad Street or Meeting Street, I don't remember now. I mentioned it in the book. It's a Victorian with a, sort of a turret, a conical-shaped turret. And the owners put a Santa Claus hat on it every Christmas, and so it just, it was so, I don't want to say easy, but it was very, there was so much material to put into this book to make it new and different and unique because it was all about Christmas, which I had not done before. So yeah, it really lent itself to a whole book, that, I knew I had to write a book 6, so why not put it at Christmas time? Plus that cover. Come on.
Right. Exactly.
It lends itself to a great cover, too.
It does. And, it makes a great addition to anyone's shelf. You got to love it. So tell us about the story. Where does first, folks because we have on the show, we haven't really talked about Trad Street in depth. What is it about this place that makes it special? Who do we meet there? And then how does this book get kicked off?
So I call the easiest way to do it is sort of what they call the elevator pitch. So the series is basically Sixth Sense meets Moonlighting meets National Treasure. So
I love that so much.
Yeah, it's exactly what these books are. So, the first book starts out, we meet Melanie Middleton, and she is a realtor who specializes in historic real estate in the gorgeous city of Charleston. It's how she makes her living. The funny thing about her, though, even though she was born and raised in an old house in Charleston, south of Broad, she absolutely hates old houses. And the reason why she hates them is why she lives in a brand new condo in Mount Pleasant, because the reason she hates old houses is because she sees dead people. And old houses always have a spirit in them who try to get her attention, to help them solve a problem or mystery. And then in the first book, she inherits this house on Trad Street, which she calls, a goiter on her neck. Obviously, her attitudes change. But, when she first sees the house, she thinks the lot would be better served as a parking lot. Obviously, her attitude does change. Her best friend, of course, is her foil. Her best friend, Sophie, is a professor of historic preservation at the College of Charleston, who is an old house hugger. So, of course, when Melanie inherits this house, she's all excited, and Melanie is horrified. There's a lot of humor with their relationship. I love that they're best friends because they are completely opposite. And then in the first book, so after she inherits this house, she is approached by a true crime mystery writer, Jack Trenholm, who's a good-looking guy and also from Charleston. And when she inherits this house, he is researching the disappearance of a woman who had lived in that house on Trad Street back during Prohibition. And so they, of course, get together to solve that mystery. So each book has its own mystery that is solved. So each book is written to be read on its own. But as I said before, the real joy of this series is the character of Melanie and how she grows and changes and how the cast of characters grow around her as you go from book 1 to book 7. And Melanie is now Melanie Trenholm. Right. So I know, and I try to, it's kind of hard if people haven't read the whole, because in the first book you're like, oh my gosh, are they going to get together? So, but yes, by book 6 they are together. They actually have twins, and they're living in the house on Trad Street. And of course, the spirits will not leave Melanie alone. And she still has issues with trust and control. She's definitely OCD, and Jack is very, very patient and tolerant up to a point, which we get to the breaking point in this book. And I will say right now, it does end on a cliffhanger, but don't worry, there is a 7th book, and everything will be resolved in book number 7.
Nice, nice. I went to your book list on your website to try to figure out which number book this is, and I just quit counting. There was just so many books. Do you know what number this book is for you?
Yeah, this is book number of all of them. I know it's number 6 in the series, but isn't that sad? It's like I have so many children, I can't remember their names. I do not know. I could not tell you. It's like 25 or 26, something like that. At least.
Yeah. So fun. How has your writing process changed over the years in this 26, or I'm guessing more than 26 books?
Right.
Do you still approach story the same way? Have you figured out things that make it easier for you? Like, what has kind of been your progression?
Right. The good news is that I approach each book that I write now as I approached my very first book. I wanted to tell a story, the kind of book, write the kind of book that I like to read. I like to read about imperfect characters who, in the beginning of the book, find themselves in a hole that they have either dug for themselves or circumstances have dug for them. And they have to figure their way out, and then with this lovely, growing cast of characters. And so every book is, they're all very different, which is funny because I approach each book the same way. I don't think about, will this book be as successful as the last one? Will this hit the New York Times list? I block all those thoughts away, and I just try to tell a story. I bang my head against the laptop, and I just go. And that has never, ever changed. And the bad news is that it's still like sitting down and slicing it, cutting open a vein. I mean, it does not get easier. You would think after so many books, I would have a plan. I would know what I was doing, and I still have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how these books happen. They just do.
What about writing one of your standalones versus Trad Street, one of the Trad Street books? Do you begin that process differently?
Yes, because with, Trad Street, which is kind of nice, like in book 6, this book, Christmas Spirits on Trad Street, I knew there were, there are mysteries that are not solved in this book that I need to wrap up in the next book. So that's the given. That's like, I've already got my plot, Oh my gosh, it should be easy, but I have a feeling it won't be. It never is. Nothing's ever easy. Or as my dad used to say, if it were easy, then everybody would be doing it.
Exactly. When you're writing one of your standalone books, is there usually something that kicks off the imagination process? Do you look for headlines? Do you look for is there usually a kernel of something that begins the story growing?
Oh, definitely. And that kernel can come from anywhere. Like you said, it could come from a headline. It could come from a true life story of somebody that, I hear over here. It could be from the lyrics of a song. It could, I never know what's going to hit me. And I kind of keep a list, usually a mental list of, certain things, that inspire me. I'm a huge fan, when I have time, of watching Investigation ID channel, because they have awesome shows like Wives with Knives and Southern Fried Homicide, But there's always a kernel of something, and in one of my books, The Sound of Glass, that came from the History Channel, Mysteries of the Museum, and it was talking about a museum about the first forensic detective, who was a woman, by the way, and how she would do these little shoe boxes of recreating crime scenes, and they still use these methods. But I was like, holy cow, that's got to go in a book, and it did. It was such a wonderful kernel to start with. But yes, and sometimes a first line of a book will hit me, and I have no idea. Like in the time between, I was working on another book, and just quite out of the blue, this line hit me that I knew was not for the book I was working on, but for another book. And it became the first line of The Time Between. And it was, the first time I died was the summer I turned 17. I'm like, okay, who said that? Where is this? What's going on? But that was the first book of that first line of that book. So it's, I don't, and if I consciously try to think of a plot, never happens. And I don't outline anyway, but I need to have a strong kernel that I'm passionate about. And those have to come quite by accident. They'll never come to me if I actively seek them.
Right. In the course of your 26 or more books that you published, how has interacting with the audience changed? We've had the internet has really blown up and the advent of social media and that sort of thing. How did those things help an author, reach their audience now? And what are some of the things that you have to avoid that can just be, time sucks?
Right. Oh my gosh. I mean, social media, I have a love-hate relationship with it. I love being able to, really connect with readers on a very personal level. But it is the number one time suck of any author, because we are expected to be on Instagram. We are expected to be on Facebook and Pinterest and Twitter and everything else. And my gosh, if that's all I did all day, I wouldn't write. So I have to schedule it. I schedule, this like an hour of my day to do it. And obviously, a lot more has to happen when I'm on book tour. I do have a social media manager who will be taking pictures at some of the events, and she'll either send them to me or put them in a folder, and then she will either post stuff or I can post stuff, or I will take pictures and then she'll post stuff. So. Because on tour, when I do the driving, most of it. I prefer to do the driving. So, it's hard to post something on Facebook when you're driving. And, so I find a way to do it. But during the general course of my day, I cannot, if I'm, morning is my writing time, morning, afternoon, and night right now because I'm trying to finish up. But during the normal course, I try to just, do it in the evenings if and when I have downtime. And I only schedule, a small amount of time. If I'm constantly checking my phone for, updates on, how many people like this tweet? Did anybody retweet? Oh my gosh, I would never get anything done. It truly is the number one time suck, but it can be wonderful. It's a great way to reach out to readers. So yeah, my word of warning is just schedule your time. Do not be a slave to it, because you will never get your writing done. And then you won't have anything to tweet about.
Right. Karen, the new book, The Christmas Spirits on Trad Street, when folks are hearing this, the book came out yesterday, and it'll be available in hardcover and audiobook and Kindle edition. I'm such a big fan of everything that you do, Karen. Tell people where they can find you online if they want to dig into your back catalog and all that good stuff.
Sure. The best place, I've got a great website, karen-white.com. And so that dash is a hyphen, I guess, karen-white.com. And that everything, it has my book tour on it if I'm coming to a place where they are. It also has all my social media icons, Facebook, everything else if you want to follow me on all the other social media. And I also have a great Pinterest page of all things Charleston, so you can really get a picture in your head of what you're reading. That's fun. I do love Pinterest, but yeah, talk about time suck. But but yeah, so that's karen-white.com is the best place to find. There's my bio. There's pretty much and cute pictures of my dogs, which is the most important thing. And sign up for my newsletter as well, because I do fun stuff with my newsletter, and that way you'll never miss a book.
Excellent. We're going to put links to all of that good stuff in the show notes of this episode. The Christmas Spirits on Trad Street, a wonderful book. Everyone's going to love it. There's links to it there in the show notes. Karen, thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show today.
Thank you, Hank. It's been a pleasure.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
On the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, Joey locked the doors of the Washington Irving Chapel and checked the windows from the outside, making sure that the cemetery offices were dark. Satisfied, he donned a knit cap and trudged uphill to the employee parking lot. He'd forgotten how desolate the grounds became at night. A fog had gathered, blurring the moon and stars. His rusty Volkswagen Beetle, christened Ladybug by Jason, sat in shadow alongside his dad's white van, which bore an image of the horseman and the cemetery's web address. Joey swept a palmful of condensation from Ladybug's windshield and fumbled for his keys. He heard a laugh, high and young. He froze. "Hello?" He shook off goose flesh and found his key. He started the engine and backed out, headlights off, praying not to knock over a headstone again. A child stood on the hillside amongst the graves. "You okay, kid? Cemetery's closed." He turned on his headlights. The child vanished. Joey idled in the drive, frowning. What had just happened? He turned off the headlights and waited for his eyes to adjust. The silhouette reappeared. The child stood in the road now, blocking his way. He and the ghost stared at each other. He bit his tongue and squinted over the steering wheel. He couldn't resolve the ghost's features, only a tiny body in ruffles? Yes, a dress. A little girl with shoulder-length hair. The figure crouched, threw its arms over its head and skipped away. A giggle followed after. The ghost skipped up the hill, turned around, and beckoned through the fog. "Please come." Joey shook his head. No way. Ain't gonna happen. But he felt compelled to follow. What could a little girl do to him after all? He would keep a safe distance. The gravel sounded like soft rain beneath his tires. It drew him helplessly, past weeping cypresses and mausoleums blue with moonlight. He followed the giggle, the skipping ribbons, the little body made of shadow and quicksilver. The north end of the cemetery grounds rose to a steep wooded slope. The ghost had led him to Section 77, the northernmost boundary of the cemetery, but he'd lost her. He killed the engine, summoned his courage, and climbed out. The night air brought him fully awake. "Where are you?" he whispered, scanning the graves. A row of diseased hemlock trees stood at the fence line. Joey knew them well. They were dying, infested by some parasite called, he fished for the name, woolly adelgig. His crew had cut them back many times, lopping off limbs and heads, trying to save them. The hemlocks had grown back twisted and tormented. They stood as a row of grotesque sentinels guarding the threshold of the forest. The ghost climbed the slope, spun at the fence, and sat hugging her knees. The black mass of the Rockefeller State Park Preserve loomed behind her. "What do you want?" Joey whispered. "Play." He stepped forward, hands shaking. He just wanted to see her face, the face of a real ghost. To see the curve of her cheek, the sparkle that might have been her left eye. "Come and play, Joey." He froze. The sound of his name terrified him. She pointed over his shoulder. "Play with us." He turned and realized his mistake. He'd driven with his eyes on the girl, trying not to lose her, never looking behind. They had been followed.